Emma had always prided herself on her ability to manage a perfect life. A beautiful home in a quiet suburb. A loving husband, Jake, who worked in IT and always made sure they had the latest gadgets. The kind of life people envied. But beneath the glossy surface, there was something hollow. It wasn't that Emma didn't love Jake. She did, in her own way. They had been high school sweethearts, and their relationship had been the gold standard for the people around them. They'd gotten married right after college, and she had taken on a stable job in marketing while Jake climbed the corporate ladder. The small moments were what made their life seem like a fairy tale. His hand on her shoulder when they watched TV, the shared cup of coffee in the morning, the laughter over dinner as they reminisced about their college days. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The small, beautiful moments didn't feel like enough anymore. Emma could feel the tension that had been building beneath the surface for months, years even. Jake's work schedule kept him busy, and Emma, despite her outwardly perfect life, found herself lonely. She realized, somewhat reluctantly, that her identity had become intertwined with her role as a wife. She had sacrificed parts of herself to maintain the facade of perfection, but now, those pieces of her had begun to ache with an unnameable desire for something more. That was the night she met James. James wasn't supposed to be anything significant. He was a colleague at a marketing conference she had attended for work. But when they first talked, there was something magnetic about him. The way he spoke so confidently, the way his eyes locked onto hers and didn't look away. At first, it was just a harmless conversation over drinks, an innocent flirtation that she dismissed as a momentary escape from her monotonous life. But as the hours wore on, she couldn't ignore the feeling growing inside her. A rush, a craving for more. It wasn't that she didn't love Jake. It was that she was starting to feel like she didn't recognize herself anymore. She didn't even know what she wanted. And maybe that was what scared her most. James had given her his number, but at first, Emma didn't plan on using it. She went home to Jake, kissed him goodnight, and pretended nothing had changed. But the conversations with James lingered in her mind. They talked about work, about their favorite travel destinations, about what it meant to be truly alive. And with each conversation, Emma felt more drawn to him, like a moth to a flame. She had to remind herself that she was married. She loved Jake, after all. But as the weeks went by, and her boredom continued to simmer beneath the surface of her perfect life, she found herself texting James when Jake was away on business trips or late at the office. The text started out innocently enough. Questions about work, the conference, even a funny meme about marketing trends. But slowly, the conversation shifted. It wasn't about work anymore. They began talking about more personal things. He would ask her how her day was, about the things she wanted in life. He seemed genuinely interested in her, interested in the things that Jake never seemed to notice anymore. One night, after an especially long day at work, Emma found herself texting James late into the evening. The conversations became more intense. The small, flirtatious comments started to feel less like jokes and more like a promise of something forbidden. "Don't you ever wonder what it would be like if you did something different?" he had asked her once, the words floating like a dare. What would happen if you took a step into the unknown? The question haunted her, and she didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he asked it, so simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Emma had spent so many years staying within the safe boundaries of her life. She was the dependable wife, the dedicated professional. But here was James, asking her if she was ready to live outside the lines. It made her pulse race, and she found herself drawn deeper into the idea. She wasn't looking for a relationship or an affair, she told herself. But maybe, just maybe, she was looking for a way to feel something again. It happened during another work conference. This time, Jake had insisted on coming with her. He claimed he wanted to spend more time with her, but Emma knew it was just an excuse to get away from the grind of everyday life. As much as she appreciated his efforts, she couldn't help but feel like she was stuck in a loop. They went to the conference together, attended the same sessions, and even had dinner together in the hotel restaurant. But the distance between them felt palpable. That was when she saw James again. He was standing at the bar, talking to some colleagues. The moment their eyes met, a current ran through her. She excused herself from Jake, saying she needed to go to the bathroom, but instead, she found herself walking toward James. "Hey," he said, his voice smooth and inviting. His smile was knowing, like he was waiting for her to make the first move. "Hi," Emma replied, trying to mask the nervousness creeping up her spine. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'd say I'm glad to see you, but I think we both know the truth," he said with a wink. He wasn't trying to be coy. It was just the way he spoke, with that underlying sense of confidence that drew people in. Her heart raced. She glanced back at Jake, who was still talking to some colleagues. She had a choice. And for the first time in a long while, Emma wanted to make a different choice. They talked for hours. She could hardly believe how easily the conversation flowed. It felt effortless with James, unlike the stilted exchanges she had with Jake. She found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, at things she hadn't found funny in a long time. And then, before she knew it, James was leaning in closer. His hand brushed against hers, and it was like a spark had been lit between them. "Emma," he said softly, his eyes intense, "there's something about you. You don't have to pretend with me. You don't have to be perfect." The words hit her like a revelation. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect. Maybe, just for one night, she could be someone else. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm married." James smiled, but it wasn't mocking. It was understanding. "You don't have to make any decisions now. Just let go for a little while. You deserve to feel alive." The words settled in her mind, and a wave of desire coursed through her. She wanted to say no. She wanted to walk away. But a part of her, maybe a bigger part than she realized, wanted to see where this could go. She needed to feel something. She needed to feel wanted. And so, in that moment, Emma made her choice. The night was a blur of emotions and actions that Emma wasn't entirely sure she could fully process. She had followed James into a quiet corner of the hotel, away from the crowds of the conference. They had kissed, just once, a soft, lingering kiss that promised much more. For a moment, everything felt right. Everything felt like it could be what she had been searching for. But then reality hit. Emma stepped back, suddenly terrified of what she had just done. She couldn't look him in the eye. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her mind was racing. "I can't do this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I can't." But James just smiled, his expression gentle yet knowing. "You don't have to decide now, Emma, but it's not too late." She turned away from him and rushed back to Jake, her heart in turmoil. What had she just done? What did it even mean? Jake was still talking to colleagues when she arrived, oblivious to what had just transpired. But Emma knew that the moment she had shared with James would haunt her forever, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. Emma lay awake that night, the hotel room silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts whirling. She had kissed James. She had chosen to kiss James. The guilt surged through her like a tidal wave. She felt disgusted with herself for giving in to temptation, for betraying Jake, even if it was just a kiss. But it wasn't just a kiss. It was something more, a symbol of everything that had been missing from her life. The connection, the spark, the thrill of something new. And now that she had experienced it, she couldn't deny the pull, the longing. She wanted more. She needed more. But at the same time, she couldn't shake the image of Jake's face when he looked at her the next morning, smiling as though nothing had changed. The perfect facade was crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. The next day, she avoided James as much as possible. She couldn't look him in the eye. She couldn't even bring herself to acknowledge what had happened. Her mind was too tangled with shame and confusion. But even as she tried to push it out of her mind, it stayed with her, lingering like a ghost in the back of her thoughts. Jake noticed the shift, though. He wasn't blind. He could sense when something was off with Emma, even if he didn't know the details. He asked her, as he always did, about her day, about the conference. And Emma, trying to hide her inner turmoil, answered him with practiced indifference. She was good at this, too good. But the lies were beginning to taste bitter on her tongue. "Did you learn anything new today?" Jake asked, his voice warm and casual. Emma hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything. How she felt so lost. How she had kissed someone else. How she was terrified that she had ruined everything. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, She forced a smile. Yeah, just the usual stuff. It's been a good conference. But Jake, ever the perceptive one, didn't buy it. He looked at her with those familiar blue eyes, searching for the truth. Emma, is everything okay? She felt her stomach twist in knots. Is everything okay? Of course it wasn't. She had crossed a line. She had let herself fall into something that felt exciting, but now it felt like a trap. She didn't know how to escape. She quickly changed the subject. I'm just tired. Let's head back to the room. Jake nodded, but the doubt in his eyes was there, lurking beneath the surface. Emma could feel it, could see it in the way he watched her when she wasn't looking. He knew something was wrong, and so did she. Back at home, Emma's days fell into a routine. She tried to return to normal, but there was no normal anymore. She found herself constantly distracted, her thoughts drifting back to James and that kiss. She couldn't get him out of her mind. She thought of how alive she had felt when he had looked at her, when he had touched her, and how seen she had felt in that moment. With Jake, everything had become so routine, so predictable. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt like that, but she couldn't forget Jake either. He was still the man she had built a life with. He was still the one who had been there for her when her mother passed, the one who had held her hand when she was going through the hardest moments of her life. She owed him more than this. She owed him loyalty, trust. And yet, every time she tried to push James out of her thoughts, he crept back in, a reminder of everything she had been missing. She tried to talk to Jake about it, but the words never seemed to come out right. She couldn't confess the full extent of what had happened. The kiss, the yearning, the desire. She didn't even know how to explain what was wrong with her, how to ask him for something more. She couldn't even admit it to herself. Jake had been distant lately, too. His long hours at work seemed to be taking a toll on him, and though he tried to make time for Emma, she could sense the distance growing between them. The passion they had once shared was fading, replaced by something more like companionship. They had become two people coexisting in the same space, but not really living together. It wasn't that Jake had done anything wrong. He hadn't. But Emma had changed, and she couldn't ignore the fact that she wasn't the woman who had married him anymore. She didn't know who she was anymore. The nights were the hardest. When Jake would fall asleep beside her, Emma would lie awake, her mind racing, her heart torn. She wanted to reach out to him, to fix everything, but there was this part of her, this selfish, raw part, that wanted to chase the thrill she had felt with James. She didn't know why. She didn't know what was missing, but she wanted to fill that emptiness, even if it meant breaking everything she had built. One evening, after a particularly lonely day at work, Emma received a message from James. She hadn't heard from him in a few days, and part of her was relieved. But another part of her, this dangerous, reckless side, felt a thrill run through her when she saw his name pop up on her phone. Hey, the message began. I've been thinking about you. I know you're busy, but I wanted to check in. Are you okay? Emma's fingers hovered over the screen. She could feel the temptation pulling her in. She should just ignore it. She should just block him and move on. But part of her didn't want to. She wanted to feel that connection again. She wanted to feel desired. She typed back, her heart racing as she did. I'm fine. Just been busy. James responded quickly. I don't buy that. I know you better than that. Emma's breath hitched in her chest. He knows me better than Jake does. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She wasn't sure what to do, what to say. She shouldn't be talking to him. She shouldn't want to. But the words spilled out before she could stop them. I've been thinking about you too. The message sent before she could second-guess herself. And the second she saw the red notification, she felt her pulse quicken. She had crossed a line now. There was no turning back. Jake had been working late again, and Emma found herself alone in the house, her mind filled with thoughts of James. She felt like she was walking a tightrope, balancing between the life she had with Jake and the dangerous allure of what could be with James. She wanted the excitement, the freedom, but at the same time, she felt like she was betraying everything she had ever known. As the days passed, Emma found herself slipping deeper into the dangerous game she was playing. She and James continued texting, their conversations growing more intimate and charged with every message. Emma would lie to Jake, telling him she had a late meeting or was going to bed early. And when he wasn't around, She would meet James for coffee or drinks, always feeling that rush of excitement, that twinge of guilt mixed with something else she couldn't name. One evening, after a particularly heated exchange of texts, James invited her to meet him at a bar. It was late, and Emma knew that Jake would be asleep by the time she got back. She told herself it was harmless, a quick drink, a chance to clear her head. But when she arrived at the bar, something inside her shifted. James was there, waiting for her, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. They didn't waste any time. The conversation was sparse, but the chemistry was undeniable. Emma felt like she was walking in a dream, completely unaware of the consequences that loomed. "I think about you a lot, Emma," James said softly, leaning in close enough that she could feel his breath against her skin. "You make me feel alive." Emma swallowed hard, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She should stop this, she should walk away, but she didn't. Not this time. And that was the moment when it all fell apart. They kissed, and it was everything she had been craving. It wasn't just the physicality of it, though that was electrifying. It was the freedom, the feeling of letting go, of being wanted. As they broke apart, Emma knew she had crossed a point of no return. She had opened a door that she couldn't close again. The kiss lingered on Emma's lips long after she pulled away from James. It was a dangerous moment, one that would mark the point of no return in her life. She stood there in the dim light of the bar, trying to compose herself, to make sense of what had just happened. But her heart was racing, her breath shallow. The exhilaration was undeniable, and yet, underneath it all, a dark weight settled in her chest. This wasn't just a kiss. It was a rebellion against everything she had known, everything she had built with Jake. For a moment, Emma almost forgot about the world outside of the bar. All that mattered was the heat between her and James, the way he made her feel so alive, so desired. But the reality crept back in. Jake was waiting for her at home. Jake, her husband, the man who loved her, who trusted her. How could she reconcile this side of herself with the person she had been just hours ago, the woman who wore the mask of a loving wife? James must have seen the conflict in her eyes because his expression softened. "You don't have to decide anything right now, Emma. We can take it slow." Slow? Emma shook her head. There was no such thing as slow in moments like these. Every touch, every glance, every word that passed between them had set her heart on fire. There was no turning back from this. I should go home," she said, her voice trembling slightly. James's lips curved into a sly smile, but there was no malice in it, just a kind of understanding, as if he knew exactly what she was going through. "Of course. But don't forget, Emma. I'm here if you need me. Don't pretend this doesn't mean something." Emma didn't know what it meant, but she couldn't stop herself from leaning in for one more kiss, a desperate act of connection before she left. The kiss was short but intense, leaving her with a rush of emotions she wasn't sure how to process. She pulled away quickly, almost ashamed, but also needing to feel that fire again. As she walked back to her car, the world seemed different. The night air was cool, but it felt electric, charged with the weight of everything that had just happened. She told herself she was making a mistake, that she needed to go home and fix things with Jake. But the longer she walked, the further away she felt from him. She could feel the distance between them growing with every step. When Emma arrived home, Jake was already asleep. He had a long day at work, and it was late by the time she returned. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that always made her feel like a ghost in her own life. She crept into their bedroom, careful not to wake him, but her mind was spinning. Every thought was consumed with James, with the kiss, with the undeniable pull she felt toward him. She lay down beside Jake, feeling the warmth of his body next to hers. He shifted slightly in his sleep, his hand finding hers. The simplicity of the gesture, the affection, should have comforted her. But instead, it made her feel even more conflicted. Was it possible to love someone and still feel this emptiness? To care for them and yet yearn for something more, something that didn't belong? She could feel the weight of the lie building inside her, like a secret buried deep within her chest. She had kissed another man, and not just any man. James, the man who had made her feel things she hadn't felt in years. The guilt churned inside her, but it was quickly replaced by something else, an unsettling sense of desire. How could she go back to the way things were, when everything inside her was shifting? As she lay there beside Jake, her heart raced, but it wasn't out of love for him. It was out of fear. Fear that she would never be able to forget James, that the pull she felt toward him would be stronger than the commitment she had made to Jake. She wanted to confess, to tell Jake the truth, but the words stuck in her throat. What would he think of her? What would it do to their marriage? Jake stirred again, his voice soft in the darkness. "Emma, are you okay?" She froze, suddenly aware of how much her mind had wandered. She had been so wrapped up in her own thoughts that she hadn't noticed how tense her body had become. "Yeah, I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Just a little tired." Jake didn't seem convinced, but he didn't push it. He just squeezed her hand and pulled her closer, as if trying to comfort her. She let herself sink into his embrace, but it felt hollow. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing, something she had found in James. The next few days were a blur of confusion. Emma couldn't concentrate on anything, not at work, not at home. The guilt gnawed at her constantly, but so did the longing. She kept thinking about James, his touch, his words, the way he made her feel seen in a way that Jake hadn't for so long. She tried to push it all away, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a dam built of paper. She and Jake went through the motions of their daily routine. They ate dinner together, talked about work, watched TV before bed. It was the life they had built, the life Emma had once thought she wanted. But now it felt suffocating. Every smile from Jake, every small gesture of affection, only made her feel more trapped. Then came the turning point. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Jake had planned a small getaway for the two of them, a weekend trip to a cabin in the woods to reconnect. Emma should have been grateful. She should have been excited. But all she could think about was James, how he was probably waiting for her to reach out again, to make the next move. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that her marriage to Jake felt like a performance, and the only person who made her feel alive now was James. When they arrived at the cabin, Jake was in high spirits, eager to spend time together. He unpacked their bags and set up a fire in the living room, while Emma stared out the window, her mind elsewhere. She told herself to focus on Jake, to try to make the best of this weekend. But she couldn't stop thinking about James. She couldn't stop the pull, the need to see him, to be near him. Her phone sat on the table, a silent temptation. After dinner, while Jake went to grab some drinks, Emma couldn't resist. She grabbed her phone and sent James a text, "Are you free tonight?" It took only a few minutes before he replied, "I was hoping you'd text me." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She quickly typed back, "I need to see you." The weight of her decision hit her almost immediately, but it was too late to turn back now. She couldn't fight this anymore. She couldn't deny the hunger inside her. While Jake was in the kitchen preparing drinks, Emma quickly grabbed her jacket and slipped out the back door. She told herself it was just for a few minutes, that she needed to clear her head. She didn't want to hurt Jake, didn't want to destroy everything they had. But deep down, she knew that by meeting James, she was already on a path from which there was no return. She drove quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. Every turn, every mile seemed to take her further from the life she had known, and closer to the chaos she had invited into her life. When she reached the hotel where James was staying, she almost didn't recognize herself. She was shaking with nerves, with anticipation, with something that bordered on desperation. James was waiting for her in the lobby, his smile as warm and welcoming as always. "I knew you couldn't stay away," he said softly, his voice sending a shiver down her spine. Emma couldn't answer. She didn't need to. All that mattered was that she was here, with him. And in that moment, nothing else seemed to matter. They spent the night together. It wasn't just physical. There was an intensity, a connection that Emma couldn't explain. With James, she was more than just a wife. More than just a woman stuck in a marriage she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. With James, she was alive. When Emma returned to the cabin later that night, her heart was heavy with the weight of what she had just done. She had been unfaithful, not just in body, but in spirit. She had betrayed Jake, and she knew there was no going back. The door was closed, and Emma had locked herself out of the life she once knew. She walked into the cabin, trying to act normal, trying to pretend nothing had changed. Jake was sitting by the fire, a drink in hand, a smile on his face as he looked up at her. "Where did you go?" he asked, his tone casual. Emma froze, her stomach twisting in knots. The lie sat on the tip of her tongue, but for the first time, she didn't know how to lie. She was too far gone, too deep into the web she had woven. But she had no choice. "I just needed some air," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake smiled and patted the seat beside him. "Come sit with me." But Emma couldn't. Not now. Not after what she had done. The reality of her choices crashed over her, and she realized just how much she had lost. The question now wasn't whether she could fix things. It was whether things could ever be fixed. The next few days were an uneasy silence between Emma and Jake. They went through the motions of their relationship, dinners, small talk, and the usual routines. But the truth hung heavy in the air. Emma could feel it pressing down on her chest, suffocating her, as if she were trapped in a room with a secret that had grown too large to ignore. Jake seemed oblivious, or perhaps he didn't want to face the truth. He kept up his usual affectionate gestures, giving Emma a kiss on the cheek when he left for work, asking if she was okay when he returned home. But Emma could no longer respond with the same sincerity. She felt like a fraud, a stranger in her own life. That night, after another hollow dinner, Emma sat alone in their bedroom, staring at the empty space next to her on the bed. She was supposed to be grateful for Jake. He was kind, reliable, and patient. He had never asked for much, and he had always been there for her when she needed him. But the truth was, she wasn't sure she could go on pretending anymore. She wasn't sure if she even knew who she was anymore. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from James. She hadn't heard from him since their night together, and part of her had been avoiding him, not wanting to dive deeper into the mess she had created. But she couldn't resist checking it. "Are you okay?" James's message read, "I've been thinking about you. A lot." Emma felt a pang in her chest, a deep longing for the freedom she had felt in his arms. She had lied to herself, convinced herself she could walk away, but now she realized she was trapped. She had let herself fall into something she couldn't control. "I'm not okay," she typed back, her fingers trembling as she did. "I'm lost." The response came almost immediately. "You don't have to be lost, Emma. I can help you find yourself again." Her heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but they struck a deep chord in her. She had been seeking something for so long, something she couldn't put into words. And in James, she thought she might have found it. But as she read the message again, doubt crept in. She thought about Jake, about how much he trusted her, about the future they had built together. Could she really throw it all away? Was it worth it? The temptation was overwhelming, but the weight of the decision was suffocating. She put her phone down, the guilt crashing over her in waves. She could feel herself slipping, spiraling out of control. She needed to stop, to take a step back, but the pull of James's words, of his presence, was too strong. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind a tangled mess of conflicting emotions. She had made choices that had altered the course of her life, and now there was no going back. The following weekend, Jake suggested they take a trip out of town, just the two of them, a last-ditch effort to rekindle their relationship. Emma agreed, not wanting to disappoint him, but deep down, she knew it was too late. She had already crossed a line that she couldn't uncross, and she could feel the distance between them growing with every passing hour. As they drove to their destination, the silence between them was thick and uncomfortable. Jake kept glancing at her, his brow furrowing, sensing that something was off, but he didn't ask. He didn't want to know, and Emma couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. When they reached their cabin, the tension only grew. Jake was eager to spend time with her, but Emma's mind kept drifting back to James, to the desire she couldn't shake. She tried to distract herself by helping Jake set up the cabin, but nothing could pull her from the weight of her choices. That evening, after a quiet dinner, Emma found herself alone on the porch, staring out into the dark woods. Her mind was a whirlwind, torn between her past and her present. She had hurt Jake, and she knew it. But could she repair what was broken? Could she rebuild the trust that had been shattered? Or had she already lost him? As she sat there, her phone buzzed again. She knew who it was before she even looked at it. James. She picked it up without hesitation. I miss you, the message read. Are you still thinking about me? Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had been trying so hard to ignore the pull, to push James out of her mind, but here he was, reaching out to her again. She felt a momentary surge of desire, a need to respond, to confess her longing. But as her fingers hovered over the keyboard, she hesitated. And then she heard Jake's voice from inside the cabin. Emma, are you out there? She quickly put the phone down and stood up, wiping away the tear that had unknowingly slipped down her cheek. She walked inside, plastering a smile on her face, trying to act like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It hadn't been fine for a long time. As Jake smiled at her, asking if she was okay, Emma realized the truth. She had reached a breaking point. She couldn't keep living this lie. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. Something had to change, but she wasn't sure what that change would look like. And in that moment, Emma knew that the consequences of her actions would soon come to light. She couldn't run from the truth forever. Sooner or later, it would catch up to her. The days that followed the trip were tense, more so than ever. Emma couldn't escape the gnawing feeling of guilt, and the distance between her and Jake was growing wider with each passing moment. She couldn't look him in the eye without feeling like a stranger. She could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken question hanging over them. What's going on? Jake, ever the patient one, didn't ask directly, but his actions spoke volumes. He tried harder than ever to make things work. He sent her sweet texts, bought her little gifts, even made her breakfast one morning as a surprise. But none of it reached her. None of it could bridge the gap that had formed between them. One evening, after another uncomfortable dinner, Jake finally broke the silence. He set his fork down, looked at her seriously, and asked, Emma, what's going on? You're not the same. I can feel it. Are you unhappy with me? With us? Emma's heart raced as she met his gaze. The moment of reckoning had arrived. She could feel the weight of her choices in her chest, the suffocating burden of the truth she had been hiding from him. Jake, she couldn't find the words. How could she explain what had happened? How could she tell him about the affair, about the longing she felt for someone else? But Jake was already ahead of her. He had seen the signs. He had been waiting for her to be honest with him, to open up, but he had reached his limit. I know, he said softly, his voice filled with sadness. I know something's going on, Emma. I don't know what it is, but I can feel it. And I can't keep pretending everything's okay. Emma's stomach twisted. She hadn't expected him to confront her so directly, but now that he had, she knew there was no way out. The truth was going to come out, and it was going to tear everything apart. I've been seeing someone else, she whispered, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. I kissed him. I've been thinking about him ever since. Jake's face paled as if he had been struck. The hurt in his eyes was almost unbearable. For a moment, Emma couldn't breathe. She had just destroyed everything. He stood up, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You've been seeing him? Behind my back? After everything we've been through? His voice shook with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I'm so sorry, Emma choked out. I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But the words felt hollow. Nothing could undo the damage she had caused. And in that moment, Emma realized that there was no going back. She had to face the consequences of her actions. Jake stood there for a long moment, staring at her, as if trying to process what she had just said. Then, without another word, he walked out of the room. Emma collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with sobs. She had lost him. She had lost everything. The truth had finally come crashing down, and there was no escaping it.